To begin with, I'd like to say that in MENA countries, there are very high levels of STEM graduation among women. So as an example, my country, Canada, has never graduated more than 20% women in any cohort of engineering graduates. Now compare that to countries like Morocco, Tunisia, Jordan, which sees far higher levels of STEM graduation among women, including in many cases at 50% or above. So that's wonderful. So clearly in MENA countries, the challenge is not with education. It's not with women's ability to not succeed in STEM fields, which is very high. The issue is employment. That's the biggest challenge. So once women actually earn these degrees, earn their STEM degrees, finding employment that is both sort of suitable as well as commensurate with their qualifications is the big challenge. So that's the big part of the puzzle that we need to address in order for the renewable energy industry to optimally benefit from the talents of half of its population in any country. So I would say that anything that takes a more career cycle approach, which means not just focusing on recruitment, because that is clearly a challenge that has been won not in many countries around the world, but certainly in MENA countries. So the big challenge there is thinking about recruitment as well as retention. In other words, will women first join the sector at levels that are commensurate with their education? Then will they actually stay? Will they stay 1 year on, 5 years on, 10 years on, 15 years on? And not only will they stay, but will they be able to advance to leadership positions in different organizations? So anything that takes that approach, I would say, is a good approach because we see very clear things. For example, we call it the leaky pipeline, which means that in certain industries, energy is one, construction, transportation, manufacturing are others. We see that women enter the sector, but then say within about 5 years, we've seen that a fairly large number of them have already dropped out of the sector, or they're still working, but they're working in different industries, which means that there was something about the work culture, there was something about their ability to manage work and life that got in the way of remaining in that sector. So then workplace culture, addressing it is really important. As an example, we found that if women have 2 or 3 children below the age of about 6 or 7 at any given time, it becomes virtually impossible without extensive employer accommodations for them to be able to manage work and to be able to manage sort of childcare responsibilities. Alongside that, of course, we have to think that social norms need to change because children are not a women's issue. Childcare is not a women's issue. Childcare is a societal issue. So part of it is norm change, that we have to sort of change the way we think about these issues so that men understand that childcare is as much their responsibility as it is women. So that's a very big part of it. Now that is social norm change, which is slow, we understand that, but social norms and cultural norms are known to be dynamic and adaptive. They're not static, they change all over the world. After all, if you think about it, in China, women had their feet bound because that was considered a cultural and social norm, and that's long done away in the past. So I think it's very important to remember that cultural norms change over time. The other big things to think about is that the renewable energy industry is generally not promoted very well to women and girls. So the reason is, well, the fossil fuel industry has long been male dominated. So you have mostly men working in that industry. And as a result, people who are working in oil and gas are very aware of the challenges. They're aware of the environmental challenges. They know that the sector is facing sort of a natural end. So they're transitioning from fossil fuels, because they already know the industry, into renewables. And often they're getting that information, not necessarily from academic institutions, they're getting that information from their family. So if you have a father who worked as a petroleum engineer, you're more likely to get that information from your father and know that you should specialize in something else. Now that doesn't mean that women can't benefit from having a parent or having a family member in that sector, and they do. Some of them, of course, they do. They benefit from. So when you hear of big renewable energy companies and you hear of women who are leading them, in many cases, they had that information provided through a family and friends network rather than an educational institution. So it's not intentional. There's no desire to oppress women necessarily. It's just that it's an industry. Oil and gas has renewed itself repeatedly with a very particular type of workforce. So anything that can meet that challenge, in other words, providing that information early on to women and girls in the way that men receive it, men and boys receive it, is also a very good way of increasing the number of women in the renewable energy industry. So I think of organizations, for example, like Women in Clean Energy, I think of Renew MENA, these networks that are now devoting themselves to doing exactly that, providing information about careers early on, about trajectories, about how to build careers, and so that women, often frankly, as well as men who don't have those connections. It benefits everyone, not just women. So that piece is really important, I would say. And next, I think it's very important to understand that the renewable energy industry and the energy industry in general is extremely versatile. So it's not just about working in one type of jobs, there are opportunities right across the spectrum.